Hi everybody, I'm Bill Whittle. Welcome to PJTV. Early one morning in October of 2013, Gracie Escamilla, a grandmother from Mission, Texas, was startled when she awoke to find people breaking into her home. She rushed to the top of the stairs only to find that the people assaulting her house were actually law enforcement officials. They were coming to arrest her for Medicare fraud, which by no means is a violent crime and did not necessitate such a heavy police response. Joining me now is the editor of the Tattler, Bryan Preston, who's interviewed her extensively to uncover why these agents would essentially break into a citizen's home like this. Thanks for being here, Bryan.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here.
Before we get into the details, this is the kind of case that I can understand why you'd be interested in. We'll talk about that later. But this is kind of a incoming kind of a sine wave that's getting a little ugly out there in America. So let's go over some of the specifics.
Sure.
The crimes that she allegedly committed, white-collar crimes. Can you tell us what she's been charged with officially?
Yeah, the worst crime, Bill, that she's charged with is identity theft, a couple of counts of that, and then behind that, some billing fraud in the Medicare-Medicaid system, having to do with how ambulance services are billed. So we're not talking bank robbery or grand larceny here.
No, and she was treated like she was running a meth lab in her house or something.
Absolutely. There was a military-style raid conducted on her home at the dawn of the day when her husband was about to go to work, and this is the kind of style and the time of day kind of raid that they typically do on crack houses,
right,
when they want to find the drug addicts and the crack makers. Asleep. Yeah.
Let's take a look at her description of what happened that day.
I was in bed. I heard a loud noise. You know, somebody was breaking into my house. I came outside. I came out on my staircase, and with only my underwear, no top. Afraid of, I thought it was an invasion, a home invasion. And shortly after that, my husband was in the door. He was getting ready to leave to work. He yelled outside, "Who is it? Who is it?" And it was, I guess, the police and the investigators. Shortly after that, they came inside, and one of the investigators and police, a male officer, was standing on the side of the staircase. And again, I was in my underwear, no top. And the male investigators or the police officers looked at me, were looking at me without a top. I went back to the room with the investigator, one of the lady investigators, and she handed me a blouse and a pair of pants, a random blouse and pair of pants. And I put them on. After that, she told me not to get anything, no items, no telephone or my cell phone or my purse, nothing. I was not allowed to get anything. They put handcuffs on me and did not say anything. I asked, "What are you doing this?" or "What happened? Where are we going? Where are you taking me?" They did not say anything at all.
Wow. So you've got, it's not like a bang, bang, bang. Who is it? Police officers open the door. This is people coming in through your windows, doors being bashed down. You've got a husband there. His wife is half naked. It's a miracle that this guy wasn't armed, because if he had been, we would have had at least a dead husband, probably a dead wife, and maybe a couple of dead police officers for what is essentially a white-collar crime. Does this seem warranted to you?
Yeah, absolutely not, Bill. This does not seem warranted. And you made a couple of good points in there. The first about the possible fatality. Her husband was right at the front door when the police started coming in, and he did have a firearm in the home, and his first thought was, this is a home invasion, which is the other good point. There are home invasions conducted in that part of the country, we're talking the Rio Grande Valley, South Texas, all the time. In fact, law enforcement officials have been caught engaging in home invasions, and some have now gone to prison, or they're about to go to prison for this. So her first thought, this being a home invasion, was a very realistic thought. There had been a home invasion about a block and a half from their home a year before. So it was a very possible thought. Yes, there could have been fatalities. No, this was not warranted at all.
It was very fortunate the husband was downstairs by the door. If he'd been up in the bedroom with his wife and her people coming through the wall, he likely would have grabbed his firearm, and we would have had bodies on top of this. Well, this is how Gracie described how they actually entered her property.
They jumped the gate, the electric gate. They all jumped They broke our sprinkler system. And I feel that they could have called or something, you know. There was no necessary for them to jump the gate. I'm not a criminal.
Okay, so we can already clearly hear the trauma in her voice. She's been traumatized by all this.
Yeah.
So we're trying to build a larger case here. So if we were lawyers, let's just kind of break this down in little pieces. Was it necessary for the police to come swinging in through ropes and descend from helicopters, metaphorically speaking?
Right.
Or could they simply have walked up to the door, knocked on the door, and done it the way that any other law enforcement type of operation would have taken place for a crime of this magnitude?
They could have done that, and in fact, they did do that first. A few months before, they wanted her to come in for an interview, and so they just left a business card at her gate. And she called them. She went in for a couple of interviews and made herself available for future ones.
So she's completely cooperative. It's not like she's not responding. It's not like they've called her 5 times or served warrants or tried to.
Exactly.
She's been completely cooperative. Next thing you know, they're coming in through the...
Absolutely.
Once it was there, it seems, they didn't even bother to read her rights. Let's see what she has to say about that.
They did not read my rights. They just said, you cannot get anything. You cannot get your purse, your phone, nothing at all.
Okay, it's starting to be pretty obvious why this kind of thing is interesting to you, but it's not just as an individual case. It's beginning to look more like a sort of a national kind of a trend that we're starting to see. But let's just stay on this case for a minute here.
Sure.
This is obviously a violation of her constitutional rights for the police to behave in a fashion like this.
Yeah, according to both Gracie and her husband, her rights were not read to her, and they were never shown the warrant. One of the officers, as he came in, flashed a piece of paper, said, "This is the warrant," and then took it away. They were never allowed to read it. She was never told to consult a lawyer or to call for a defense attorney or anything.
Before we go any further, can you identify who these law enforcement officers were?
They were federal.
Federal law enforcement officers, okay. Gracie says that her life was pretty good prior to this incident.
Never in my life have I been involved in something like that. Never been arrested. So to me, it was very humiliating.
And needless to say, she says also that regardless of the legal outcome, this has really upended her life.
Been taking jobs for minimum wage. Just trying to help in the finances here at home. We don't live in luxuries. Just hardworking people. Never been in trouble with the law. And going through this, it's a life change.
Okay, well, let's assume for the sake of the argument that she's guilty.
Sure.
There may be some compelling evidence that she's not, but let's say that she is guilty. Let's say that she did in fact commit this, this crime of fraudulently billing Obamacare services for some unspecified amount of money for the time being.
Sure.
Does any kind of crime warrant the kind of treatment that federal law, I mean, if this woman could have been a murderer, she still would have had to have been read her rights, presumably.
Yes. Yeah, if you're charged with a crime, you have to be read your rights.
Right.
She wasn't. And this case to me is so frustrating. We are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty in this country.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah, remember that? Well, I think we've forgotten that. Because in this case, she was treated like a criminal as she was taken in. She was actually held for several days incommunicado. And like I said, she wasn't read her rights. And she's now had to take on debt to defend herself in this case in which she insists she's not guilty. And having interviewed her and seen other evidence, I'm inclined to agree that she's not.
Let's go back to the victim one more time here. She says that she wanted to do a story about this in order to clear her name. She's obviously, from the previous segment, paid a fair price for this in terms of economic disadvantages and hardship being attached to this particular raid. So let's see what she has to say about it.
I just want to, do this story to clear my name, that I am not that person that they say that I am, that I was involved with that. At no time, was I involved. Like I said, never been audited in my life.
Yeah.
Take great pride on my job that I do, which was medical billing.
Again, for the moment, let's just say she's guilty.
Sure.
I suspect that the reason you're interested in this is for the same reason that I'm interested in this particular case, putting the personal assault against her aside,
right.
Why it seems to have larger implications to me. She's been charged with fraudulent dealings with Obamacare. She gets raided by huge numbers of federal agents in the morning.
7 of them, yeah.
Yeah. The first thing that I was reminded of when I heard about this case, just talking with you about it, was a case that happened a couple years ago where a filmmaker named Mr. Nabula was suddenly, all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, what was it, 12, 21 state troopers, something like this, appear in the middle of the night, take him out of his house for what was a routine parole violation, absolutely routine. You don't generally muster 20 state troopers at midnight to pull a guy out of his house for a routine parole violation. But it turned out, in this particular case, that man had made a movie that the Obama administration was using to cover the debacle in Benghazi. So federal law enforcement is brought in, kicking in doors, taking innocent civilians, or at least presumptively innocent civilians, out of their house, hauled them away because it's embarrassing to the Obama administration. Federal law enforcement is being used and deployed against the American people to intimidate them and to make them pay for getting off the party line.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I do think there's an Obamacare connection to this. We're talking about Medicare, Medicaid fraud, which obviously is connected to Obamacare. And I think the president and the men around him, Eric Holder and so forth, they want Americans to see this law and order presence. But what we're seeing now is a very disturbing militarization of the police.
All across the spectrum.
That's one of the things that got me involved in this story, was the militarization of the police. I spent time in the military. My father's in law enforcement now. I'm as pro-military and as pro-police as you can be. However, they're two different animals. They're two very different things. And this militarization of the police forces domestically in this country is incredibly dangerous to the rule of law and to individual freedom.
Let's be crystal clear about this. I completely agree with you in my high regard for law enforcement and the military. And we are talking about, as I mentioned earlier, I think, it appears to me to be the leading edge of what is appearing to be a bell curve. In other words, given the spectrum of psychologies that exist within law enforcement officials, the vast majority of them are still law-respecting individuals that do their job with professionalism and courage. But at the far end of that bell curve, on either direction, you may find people whose appeal to this kind of authoritarianism, the sense of being an operator, Delta Force guy, the sense of not having to answer to anybody, of being kind of a bad kind of kick the door down kind of guy. We're starting to see more and more of this. And I have to tell you, Brian, of all the things I've seen in the last couple of years, the thing that depressed me the most, really in my guts, was seeing this kind of behavior from park rangers during the government shutdown.
Right.
Park rangers.
They're supposed to be the nice face of the government.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were keeping people locked on buses, and they were ordering around, pushing them around, because the people had the temerity to shut down or even oppose the government. Yeah,
to use parks that are public property, that should not have been shut down, that had never been shut down in a government shutdown case before. That was a new tactic that the Obama administration used there. I think this year we're looking at a new tactic of going after people to scare them, to terrify them, ultimately to disarm them, and to strip them naked in the eyes of the law, which this was literally done to Gracie here. And again, we're not talking about a hardened criminal in this case. We're talking about a 52-year-old grandmother of 2 who, I checked into her criminal record. There isn't one, and they did this to her.
Okay, so if you are a defender of this president and his policies, you might say, what's the fuss about? It's an isolated incident. And the Nabula case may have been an isolated incident. But as you start to look at things like the IRS, weaponization of the IRS against conservative groups, the weaponization of the National Security Agency, spying not just on suspected American collaborators with terrorists, but basically spying on everybody.
Right.
It is no longer apparent to many Americans that the government is here to protect us from foreign agents or from criminals or terrorism or anything. It's beginning to look like the job of law enforcement is to protect the government from the people. And if that is the case, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, they're starting to treat innocent, ordinary people like Gracie, Escamilla, and Nakoula as enemies of the state. And these are just average, ordinary people. Nakoula, yeah, he'd had some fraud crimes in his past for which he was on parole, but they picked him up in this violent raid. They did the same thing with Gracie. They are treating us like enemies instead of citizens. And that is an incredibly important shift in American history if it continues.
And it's coming from the top down.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's going to do it for us today. Thank you, Brian, for reporting on this and for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us.
My pleasure, Bill. Thank you.
I'm Bill Whittle, and we here at PJTV will continue to provide these stories for you, the ones that the mainstream media simply will not cover. So look for more of Brian's reporting at the PJ Tattler, and keep yourselves tuned into PJTV. Thanks for watching. I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next time.